another Democratic voice. As we've done all day long, we are bringing you both Democrats and Republicans to provide some analysis and some expertise on what you've been watching here. The impeachment hearings of President Donald Trump in their first day right now on a break. In fact, we are monitoring Capitol Hill to make sure we know when those members come back in so that we can take the very end of these hearings. And I want to introduce Andrew Learned, who is a candidate for the Florida House, and want to just kind of get your first impressions. Andrew, you've been watching all day as well. What did you think of these hearings?
Yeah, so first of all, I will admit I wasn't watching all day this morning. I was on the campaign trail. We're talking healthcare and things that matter to actual voters here in Florida. What I did get of the call and of all the hearings that I've heard so far and what Kayleigh just alluded to is, frankly, Republicans just trying to throw as much mess at the screen as humanly possible to try to muddy this all up. This is not that complicated. It comes down to three simple questions. It's whether did Trump seek to use the presidency to advance his own personal political gains? Did he extort Ukraine to those ends? And did he cover it up? And if those things happen, then impeachment goes forward. All of this talk that Kayleigh was just alluding to, as far as was it on the call, was it not on the call, the transcripts, all of these shadowy figures and conspiracy theories are meaningless. It comes down to those three simple facts, and overwhelmingly, the answer was yes to all 3 points.
If it bears out through the evidence over the course of the coming weeks in these impeachment hearings that some of those three things that you mentioned were true, but not all. So you say, did the president use his office for personal gain? Did he then try to extort via a quid pro quo and exchange, a linkage for this military aid, the announcement of investigations into Burisma and Hunter Biden, and also the beginning of the 2016 Russia investigation? And then did he cover it up? Do all three of those have to be true for you to think that the president should be impeached?
So the question before the House of Representatives right now isn't the trial, right? This is the evidentiary phase. Mm-hmm. This is where we go through and we figure out,
I'm just asking if only one of those were true. Let's just say that he wasn't, that there was no quid pro quo and that he didn't try to cover it up, but that he did abuse his office for personal gain to try and get an investigation launched into a political rival to help his reelection campaign. If only that part was true, is that still impeachable?
Yeah, I think so. I think the broader point, though, is we're still looking to see what other crimes happened here. I mean, every hearing we learn more information, and these tea leaves keep falling. This is something that's been going on for just under a month now, and we've already learned as we just both essentially agreed to, 3 impeachable offenses. Each one would be impeachable under its own rights. And there are more coming out. I mean, there are still, the White House is still obstructing White House subpoenas. The State Department and Office of Management and Budget are still refusing congressional subpoenas. These are in themselves impeachable offenses for violating Congress.
I want to ask you a question that I think is incredibly relevant to you, but also to so many hundreds of other people who are out there running for office in 2020. You are running for a seat in the state legislature, a down ballot race from the president, which will be right at the top. Mm-hmm. Is this a motivating factor for both Democrats and Republicans? Will this be the inquiry itself, and let's say the president was to be impeached? Is that a danger for people like you, that Republicans who are incensed by this inquiry to begin with will be motivated to come out and vote, and that could result in people like you who aren't involved in this inquiry per se, but are down the ballot races, that could be a danger for people like you?
I don't think there's a danger in any of this for me at all. I mean, I think we saw that in 2018 when Democrats swept and took back power in the House of Representatives. I mean, let's face it, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't be having these hearings if the Republicans were still in control of the House of Representatives. There were people that came out and knocked on doors and resisted for 2 years who brought us to this point so that we can have these hearings, so Democrats can have their day in court, and we can talk about the excesses and the rampant abuse of the Trump administration. And that held them accountable in 2018. We flipped a bunch of House seats, and the same will be true in 2020. The more we spend talking about this is another day that Trump is going off. I think last I counted, there were 24 crazy tweets over the last during this hearing alone. This is something that is absolutely going to be the thorn in his side over the next year.
One more question for you before we bring JB back in to see what's going on the social side. You talked about how this morning you were out talking to real voters, talking about issues that matter, healthcare. You're a former veteran yourself. Obviously, the military is going to be one of the most important things that brings people out to vote in 2020. Do you think the American people care about this? How much do they care versus the things you were talking to them about earlier today?
I think people care. I think, the thing with impeachment is everybody's opinion is baked in. I mean, everybody has an opinion on this, whether you're for it or against it. I think the thing that most people do care about is, what does this do going forward, right? Like, what are we going to do? Are we going to give Trump a green light for, another year of corruption if we let him off the hook for this, or another 4 years of corruption if we give him a pass at the ballot box? Or are we going to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, it's time for some new folks to come up here who are, just going to restore a sense of decency to Washington, so we don't have to interrupt our day to come talk about crimes and misdemeanors. We do want to be on message about healthcare. We do want to be talking about the fact that Florida is 46 in the country for teacher pay. Those are things we absolutely want to talk about, but we can't, because Trump and his Twitter feed and all of this noise that comes out of Washington, and it is time to get back to a country with some basic decency out of our leadership.
Let's bring in JB Buno, who is the host of our digital live streams right here. JB, what's happening on social?
Yeah, a lot going on here on social, and I want to continue hearing from Andrew here as we continue the analysis of the first public impeachment hearing live from our nation's capital. But one of the names that is coming up quite a bit on Twitter is Jim Jordan, of course, the representative representing Ohio. And a lot of the exchanges, a lot of the time was yielded to Jim Jordan from Ohio. I want to get to one exchange here really quickly. We're going to toss to it here. Jordan going on the offensive against Bill Taylor here. Let's take a listen in, everybody. This is Jim Jordan a short time ago.
This is what I can't believe, and you're their star witness. You're their first witness. You're the guy. You're the guy based on this. I've seen church prayer chains that are easier to understand than this. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told, now again, this is, I hereby swear and affirm from Gordon Sondland. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmouk on September 1st, 20. This all happens, by the way, in Warsaw, where Vice President Pence meets with President Zelensky. And guess what?
Taylor,
they didn't talk about any linkage either.
Time of the gentleman's expired.
So that was Jim Jordan a short time ago. One of the moments that's getting a lot of action on social media. So, Evan, I'll toss it back to you. But one of the themes that's playing out quite a bit right now on Twitter was the lack of a firsthand account at this first impeachment hearing. A lot of people on Twitter and Facebook, really across social media, talking about that common thread here amongst Republicans, constantly bringing that up over the course of the day.
Yeah, and I found that to be very interesting, actually, because what you heard is sort of a dual message. Like, at first it was this: there's no firsthand information here. This is all second, third, fourth hand, which is not entirely true, obviously. A lot of what both men testified to are what they saw and what they heard, and they repeated that they weren't here to be star witnesses for anyone, that they were just telling what they knew, what had happened to them, and what they had heard. But then there was sort of a dual narrative, Andrew, and I want to bring you back in for your opinion on this, that at first it was this information is all second, third, and fourth hand, and that's why the whistleblower's complaint should be thrown out, and that's why this testimony is not that important. But then we also heard how much Republicans want to talk to the whistleblower, which doesn't make sense if the whistleblower's information is second and third or fourth hand. How did you gel those two together?
Yeah, anytime Jim Jordan is talking, I kind of take a pause. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, everything from the whistleblower to all of the witnesses we've heard today their statements have been corroborated by multiple other accounts. So, the need to have one person who heard it firsthand is kind of ridiculous. Secondly, the reason we haven't heard anything firsthand is because the White House itself is blocking those firsthand accounts. Mick Mulvaney and Pompeo, John Bolton, all of which could come testify, all of which have defied congressional subpoenas to do so. And lastly, I mean, Jim Jordan.
And to be clear, hypocrisy. Bolton has not been subpoenaed yet. In fact, Bolton's lawyer, Bolton's lawyer has said, if you subpoena us, we will come. And by the way, we've got some interesting, tantalizing information.
Yeah.
We don't know if he's trolling Democrats, or if he actually does have some information that could be helpful to that cause.
Sure. And lastly, Jim Jordan, the hypocrisy of it. I mean, that man sat on in that seat for 33 different Benghazi hearings without ever calling on any firsthand account witness who was there. And then when Hillary Clinton did show up and testified for 11 hours, I mean, you heard it today. The Democrats asked, well, if you want a firsthand account, get Donald Trump to come and testify, which they won't do. So the hypocrisy of the Republican side in these arguments is fairly ridiculous.
I want to go back to something that I just asked you about, because I felt like I maybe phrased the question wrong, where I was making it relevant to you and to other people who are getting elected. Let's take a broader view, though. Does this impeachment inquiry equally energize both Democratic and Republican voters? Or is it more of a boon for Republicans if the president is impeached and people see that as partisan? To your point, most people's opinion is already baked in. We've talked about a poll throughout the day today that said 83% of people already have their mind made up, and there's only a 17% sliver who are maybe waiting for this information to come out. So just a broader view, not so much for you as a candidate, but for people at the ballot box. Is this going to motivate both sides or one over the other?
No, I think you're right that it motivates both sides, but I absolutely think it motivates one over the other in the sense that we just flipped the Virginia legislature. We just flipped the Kentucky governorship. We have been winning. The Kentucky race was a 30-point swing, and it happened the night after Trump came to beg voters to help his candidate, and he lost, right? So
is the Trump effect dwindling?
I absolutely think people are just fatigued, right? You hear it when you talk to people every day. To get back to our conversation earlier, people want to be talking about healthcare. I own a small business, and our sales over the last couple of months are down. There's a dip in the economy. Everybody's feeling it on Main Street, while Trump continues to tweet out stock market reports that show that the market hasn't increased at all over the last 12 months. So people want us to be on message. The Democrats have passed everything from voting rights legislation to climate change legislation, gun safety measures, all of which go to the Senate and they languish. The House Republicans are passing stuff left, right, and sideways that goes to the Senate and just gets blocked. And this is the kind of partisan gridlock that voters at home hate, and they want to get past it. You can't, as Democrats, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We can hold Trump accountable at one hand while we talk about how we're going to make healthcare more affordable for more Americans at the same time.
Okay. I want to hear from the man at the center of all of this. President Trump was asked earlier today during a meeting with the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, was sitting in the White House Oval Office with him, and reporters asked him what he thought about the impeachment hearings that were going on today. And I think we have a soundbite from him. JB, let's play what the President Trump said.
I did not watch it. I'm too busy to watch it. It's a witch hunt. It's a hoax. I'm too busy to watch it. So I'm sure I'll get a report. There's nothing. I have not been briefed. No, there's nothing there. I see they're using lawyers that are television lawyers. They took some guys off television. I'm not surprised to see it because Schiff can't do his own questions.
Okay, President Trump, that was the first time I had heard that soundbite as well. President Trump there saying that he hadn't heard the impeachment hearings, wasn't watching, referenced that the questioning was being done by lawyers, and then sort of put down Representative Schiff there. If you haven't been watching, lawyers were used on both sides to actually ask the questions. That wasn't just on the Democratic side. So Steve Castor, I believe, was asking the questions on the Republican side, and Daniel Goldman, the attorney for the Democrats on the House Select Committee. But that's in line with what the president does, was trying to sort of get a couple barbs in, and he is effective in that messaging with the people who support him. Andrew.
Oh,
sorry. You were back up. Just that he, that whether if you're supportive of the president, you like those sort of attacks, even though that's not entirely factual.
Yeah, he called him an armchair lawyer, and he's an armchair CEO, right, or a TV CEO. I think it's particularly telling that Roger Stone, one of his chief campaign chairmen along the way, today was testifying that he lied to protect Trump, right? Like this entire charade, whether you frankly agree or disagree with the facts of this case or not, all of this is on brand for the Trump presidency and has been since the first day. I mean, I ran for Congress in 2018 after Trump, on his third day on the job, took a briefing from a Mar-a-Lago ballroom to order a team into Yemen, and one of our guys didn't come home. He tweeted the Muslim ban the night before. None of this has changed, from mocking reporters, people with disabilities, putting kids in cages on the southern border and making fun of them at the same time. I mean, he has been nothing if not on brand. And, I think your question is, some people love that. And yes, and I'm running to beat those people in 2020.
Fair enough. There's one more soundbite that we have from the proceedings that I thought was interesting that I would like to play now. There was a point made by Republican Senator
Himes.
No, so the Republican Representative Himes was actually doing the questioning.
Oh, okay, I'm
JB,
sorry.
thank you. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky on Sunday
yes,
on
yes.
Meet the Press was trying to compare the fact that President Trump was asking for these investigations with what Joe Biden had done while he was the vice president. And I want to play that exchange right now.
Senator Rand Paul on Sunday said, and I quote him, "They're impeaching the President Trump for exactly the same thing that Joe Biden did." Is that correct? Is what the president did in his phone call and what Joe Biden did in terms of Mr. Shokin, are those exactly the same things? And if not, how are they different?
I do not think they are the same things. What former Vice President Biden requested of former President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, was the removal of a corrupt prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin, who had undermined a program of assistance that we had spent, again, U.S. taxpayer money, to try to build an independent investigator unit to go after corrupt prosecutors. And there was a case called the Diamond Prosecutor case in which Shokin destroyed the entire ecosystem that we were trying to help create. The investigators, the judges who issued the warrants, the law enforcement that had warrants to do the wiretapping, everybody to protect his former driver whom he'd made a prosecutor. That's what Joe Biden was asking, remove the corrupt prosecutor.
So Joe Biden was participating in an open effort, established whole of government effort to address corruption in Ukraine.
That is correct.
Great. So, Mr. Kent, as you look at this whole mess, Rudy Giuliani, President Trump, in your opinion, was this a comprehensive and whole of government effort to end corruption in Ukraine?
Referring to the requests in July,
Exactly.
I would not say so. No, sir.
Yeah, I don't think President Trump was trying to end corruption in Ukraine. I think he was trying to aim corruption in Ukraine at Vice President Biden and at the 2020 election. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Representative Himes there talking about Vice President Biden at the time giving a speech after the Council of Foreign Relations, talking about how he had tried to get one of the prosecutors who was in the Ukraine taken off of the job because everyone basically around the board, the IMF, the World Bank, the EU, the United States, thought that prosecutor was corrupt. And that was not the same thing, in his words, as what President Trump was trying to do in this phone call with the Ukrainian president. Last question for you, Andrew, and then we'll have to say goodbye. Do you feel like any of this resonates with the American people? There was no gotcha moment. There was no aha. Nothing really dramatic. A few moments of levity in there with some laughter. But this is a very dense topic, and I wonder whether or not any of it really resonates with people at home.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does, just because this is part of a larger investigation, right? Like, this is day one of what we're going to be back here on Friday with more hearings. We have a lieutenant colonel who's going to be testifying. There are war heroes who testified today. These aren't partisan people. These aren't the talking heads you're going to hear on Fox News. These are people who've spent a lifetime in service in bipartisan administrations, who took bullets for our country quite literally. And it will be a cumulative effect over many, many weeks of talking about this, because we have a lot more to uncover. I mean, we just glossed the surface. We've talked to 2 people. I think, frankly, when you're coming and preparing to have this conversation with you, there are a cast of characters of, 20, 30 pages long. Like it is complicated.
And hundreds of pages of testimony.
And hundreds of pages of testimony. And that's why I think it will be a cumulative effect, because at the end of the day, it just comes down to those 3 simple questions we talked earlier. Did Trump order this as a personal favor and extort the government of Ukraine to that end? And did he cover it up? And we will have many, many more witnesses that will continue to make that case.
Andrew Learned, a candidate for the state legislature in Florida, a Democrat. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us and your expertise and providing your analysis this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for being here.